Good afternoon, Mr. Abouyoub. Thank you for honoring me to come on my show. It's a pleasure, like always, to meet such a person like you with such a history, and more than this, with such a level of spirituality. That's why today I want to talk, if you agree, more related to this, not to what is happening, but on the way, of course, we need to connect everything is happening with our consciousness. So let's talk about this. What is today? What is the subject of the day?
First of all, thank you for this invitation. I'm very pleased to be participating to it. Answering your question will request days and months, because we are living in the process of a kind of a breaking point. This process didn't start today, obviously, and to understand what is happening, we have to go back to old history of European continent at least, and look at what was the conception of the nation state in the Westphalian treaties, and from there to read all what happened since it was created, invented as a concept of, let's say, governance based on one very simple principle: the monopoly of violence in the hand of states. We lived with that. We did war, we did peace, we did economy, we did growth. It's okay. But after the Second World War, I think the new welfare state was added to this nation state. The welfare state was based on some paradigms, some rules, disciplines. It's freedom mainly, free market, and rule of law. This is what we sought, the ideal system to govern the world. In front of the system, there was another one that was built on the communist approach to governance, socialist or social democrat approach to government, and we had this Cold War between two big communities. I call them communities. But when you look carefully in the behaviors of the individuals within these two blocks, you'll find that religion played a very big role. Religions, because we are dealing with religions. Philosophy of freedom played a big role in shaping the societies. And in that period, since the Second World War, let's say to the end of the 80s, we created an atmosphere, at least in the West, of arrogance. Our children were educated under this wealth and healthy environments. We solved everything. We have no more challenges. And we created a human being that is now disarmed to face crisis. And in this process, our education system, globally speaking, was mainly based on some kind of linear approaches to the complexity of the world. With the explosion of the technologies, the disruption in the production patterns, the rising inequalities, the threat to the earth, to our common good, all these elements and others, we created an atmosphere of threats, of instability in the minds of people. How this is translated? It is translated at the level of individuals in the loss of trust in governments and in institutions, and in the spirituality. The religion, globally speaking, religions individually mentioned, didn't offer the answer the tools to the individuals to not only be citizens, but also spiritual beings. And we lost a lot of this dimension that helped, let's say, interpret the situations, have a vision as far as the world in the future is concerned. And because of that, because of all these elements, the family is dismantled, the birth rate is decreasing, the equilibrium in the society is absolutely put into question, and the famous welfare state society that was invented after the Second World War is appearing to be less reliable, less resilient. And governments, all the governments, are facing huge challenges to maintain this amount of generosity, social generosity, to keep the citizen okay with the political system. And of course, after the huge amount of crisis we had in the last 20 years, from the subprimes to the energy crisis, name it, the citizen started to put into question the creditworthiness of their leaders. So, no management of complexity, no culture to do it, no trust in leadership, so we are in a breaking point. It means that we have to reinvent the system.
Yes, to deal with complexity,
Exactly.
how you usually say. I know that Morocco is an example how to deal with all religions, and to, in fact, it's a historic point, an example of this. How we can catch this example and extend to the worldwide?
Very good question, and I'm embarrassed to answer as a Moroccan, because I don't want to be accused of some sophisticated form of propaganda, but I'll play the game as it has to be played. Morocco, to understand our way of dealing with this complexity, social disruptions, regional upheavals, name it. It's an old nation. It's one of the oldest nations in the world. When I say nation, nation state, of course. As Muslim state, or Muslim dominated state, it's more than 1400 centuries. So we accumulated, first of all, a lot of diversity. Mm-hmm. In Morocco you have almost the same human content, DNA speaking, as in Romania, more or less. We got Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, name it, Arabs, and the autochthons, the Berbers. This melting pot created a kind of social and spiritual resilience. Because at the early beginning of the monarchy, Muslim monarchy, 1400 years ago, the population requested some conditions to the first Muslim king, and it was to protect all the religions. And since that, and particularly in the last 500 years, the king is the prince of the faithful, not the Muslims, the faithful. I mean Christians and Jews. So in Morocco, you are granted the freedom of religion. And it's not strange to find in a city like the capital, Rabat, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, and nobody will see it as something that is offending its identity, its faith, or whatever. This situation was also consolidated in our history. If I take just one example, when the Franciscans, 800 years ago, came to Morocco, they were under the protection of the Sultan, I mean the king at that time. Not only a protection, but that king issued a lot of laws, especially to protect and manage the rights of this Christian community in Morocco. We even participated together to save them in Jerusalem 800 years ago. And of course, all these elements are this component that maintain very nice equilibrium between cultures. In Morocco, we have at least 4 languages, 3 belonging to the same family, Amazigh, the Arabic, and it didn't pose any problem. And it didn't pose a problem because we were accustomed to geographical connections. Of course, Spain, useless to say that we stayed there 800 years. Useless to say how Islam was disseminated by Moroccans in Africa in the 16th, 15th, 16th, 17th century. So all these communities around Morocco are part of a kind of cultural civilization pattern. And then you can understand that the ruling monarchy is the cement of all this diversity. And this is the secret. The secret of Morocco is that we don't have presidential elections every 5 or 6 or 7 years. We have the leader, constitutional leader, and he has a spiritual power, which solves many problems. We don't have to face wars of religion. No way, because there is a kind of a referee on the top of the system.
True. Mahatma Gandhi said, if you want to change the world, start with yourself.
Well, the Prophet Muhammad, peace on his soul, said, interpreting the Quran, that you cannot change God. Allah will not change a people if he doesn't change the individual. In Arabic, لا يغير الله ما بقوم حتى يغير ما بأنفسهم, which means he will never change a people or community of mankind if he didn't provide to change their soul. ما بأنفسهم, the soul, spiritual. So it was before Gandhi.
Yes. You know that I'm studying Kabbalah, and you have a great community in Morocco of Kabbalah.
Yes.
And this also influenced your spiritual connection in the country. Also, it's a concept in Kabbalah to start with yourself and with your soul and influence all above. But how we can extend this concept to the human being, what is happening now geopolitically?
Well, we left the Cold War system with 2 blocks. In such an urgent approach, with no preparation, no strategic planification, and it was a kind of chaos. This chaos coincided with what I mentioned before, inequalities, warm system or the climate changes, etc. And in that confusion, we you can identify a lot of new way of groupings, starting with the social networks. Social networks are recreating the old tribalism that led us to invent the nation state. The nation state was invented to stop the divisions, the tribals, etc. But now it is again among us. 2, inequalities are at such a high level that populism is now occupying the political scene. What does it mean? It means that the response we thought it was the ideal one, democracy, etc., is put into question. I'll take just one example. When we look at how the economic governance is in many, many countries, how the budget is managed, you'll see that we finance the welfare using the resources of this welfare, your pension system, etc. When the population equilibrium was broken, we have two old portions of our demography, less birth rates, etc. What happened? It happened that the government in place has no more the way to still proceed on financing this welfare. So he uses debt in huge quantities. If you look at many countries in Europe, the debt ratio is beyond 100%. What does it mean of GDP? What does it mean? It means that our future generation, which are not yet in this world, they cannot vote because they have nobody to represent them. So are taking on their shoulders money, debt, to finance our comfort of today. This is irresponsible because a democratic system could introduce in this analysis, in these decision-making processes, those who were not yet born and who will be the next taxpayers of the mistakes we made. This is one example. I can take 200 examples. Climate change, exactly the same thing. We did badly. We behaved badly. Who will be paying the price? Not us, unfortunately. Our children and grandchildren. So this world society, the global system, the multilateral system is not designed to take into account the future of mankind. I'm sorry to say that. And the system now, from these two blocks, is now going to spheres of influence. China, United States, Russia, but not only, India, name it. So the problem is, even if we want to dream at the global governance of the world, it will be very difficult. Because the solution is this, is to reinvent the San Francisco outcome, which is the UN system, reinvent it. To put into the same basket all the big challenges we have to face. The specialists of global worlds, global economy, and the global society, they identified 50, 60 items that cannot be treated in the nation space or the national space. And they should be put in this global basket and being treated by a kind of global governance system. We are not yet there. For me, as a specialist between brackets, it's still an utopia, but this is the only solution, is to increase the power of the community of nations in dealing with challenges that are not able to be solved within the national space.
Local, yes.
Local. And that's the big challenge that's on the shoulders of the European Union. They never managed to unite their decision-making process to really face the threats that are now really jeopardizing the resilience of the European Union. And we have a very nice example these days, the Ukraine crisis. It shows to what extent Europe is very weak, geopolitically speaking. It's a nano region. They cannot really enjoy a bargaining power that will allow peace to be feasible, to be touched by the population that are now suffering. So we are in this tipping point, as we say, or break-even, as economists say, and I hope that we can take advantage of these 3-4 crises, the pandemic, the Ukraine, the African big challenge, and put that on the table for a new round of real negotiations.
Talking about Africa, what is the big change in Africa?
Demography.
Demography.
A huge change. Africa will be the most populated continent in the next 40 years. And the huge problem in Africa, it's a rich continent, very rich, very big, and with poor governance. And if something like collective approach to the governance is to be imagined, it has to be started in Africa. Now Africa is seen by the big powers, the big states, as a continent for resources. It should be seen as the continent of opportunities and help these countries to build together the future, not divide them, because now we're dividing them. the sphere of influence, as I mentioned, which is the big threat for our, let's say, global peace, for shared prosperity, and to fight against inequalities. And today, selfishness is dominating, national interest, between brackets, and this will never allow, let's say, Africa to rely on itself, on its expertise, on its huge amount of manpower that they have, to really create a kind of alternative to what was the industrial model pattern of Europe since the 17th century.
It's true. Do we have leaders to do the next step?
What
to deal with complexity?
This is the most sensitive question. It requires a lot of courage to see what should be said. The democratic system, based on elections limited to a time frame of 5 to maximum 7 years. This time frame is not coherent with the challenges that are posed on the table of leaders. If you take the climate change, it will require 50 years of continuous work, strategies, investments, etc. If you take, name it, trafficking, immigration, so on and so forth. A government in 5 years cannot be in a position to implement those policies needed to solve the problem on the long run, because these policies are not acceptable by the constituencies. So the democratic system as it is built is putting into question the concept of leadership. We have normal leadership. Second element, which is very important, the concept of a leader is a perishable concept. Why? Because before the invention of this digital world, a leader can hide behind walls of protection. And it applies to diplomacy. 50 years ago, a diplomatic system or institution, an ambassador, when he has to treat or deal with hot issues, he has 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He can do it at ease. Writing his paper, sending telegram to the capital will analyze, and after 2, 3 weeks, 1 month, the reaction can happen. Now, any event is becoming global in less than 5 seconds. It means with your smartphone, as a normal citizen, you can create what we call now the buzz by sending images in real time. And real time means that they are translated in 40 languages in less than 2 seconds. And the leader that is under pressure because of this event has few seconds to react. And in 90% of the situations, he will be reacting by some kind of fake countermeasures. And of course, he can resist few minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, because those guys that are playing in these websites and these social networks will demonstrate that he is a liar. And of course, if things repeat like this every day, you understand that leadership is into question. The creditworthiness is into question. So I've asked you now, who is leading the world? Nobody. You have no evident, no paramount personality that is admitted, accepted by the global world community as a leader. We don't have leaders. Yes, there is a new form of leadership. It's called Google, it's called Facebook. These are the new leaders. For the first time in the history of mankind, we have possibilities to change the behavior of people. You change the behavior of people by manipulating their brain, big time, at a large scale. And in my opinion, this is the biggest threat on, let's say, freedom, democracy, etc. But paradoxically, at the same time, if we can manipulate negatively, we can manipulate positively. So these devices that we have now will, by whatever scenario you can have for the future, will change the rules of the game. Maybe direct democracy will be finally, as it was advocated for 1 century ago, maybe a reality. Anyway, the relationship between the state and the citizen will never be what it was before. And these elements will play significant role in putting into question all the equilibrium we built after the Second World War.
Thank you for coming here. I was honored to talk with you and to find your intimate thoughts, and I hope you will be open to talk when we'll find another level of leadership, because now more than ever is necessary to do something in education, to do something in the peace of our souls in order to extend to the world. More than this, you know that world peace begins with the individual. So before we change the human condition, we must change ourselves. So with this thought, I want to end and to waiting you on the next show. Thank you.